All right, yes, we're not doing our test today. We're going to wait for everybody to be here, but that just means Tuesday we'll take our test. It shouldn't be a long test. It really should be only like 15 minutes at the max. So, because there's 16 questions and then one essay test. So, yeah. All right, let's do this, yo. All right, late Renaissance in Northern Europe and Spain. That's where we're headed next. And that is chapter 23 in your giant Bible, I believe. Let me verify very quickly, but I'm pretty sure it's chapter 23. Because I don't think it jumps to...
So would this be late Renaissance?
Yeah, it's 16th century in Northern Europe and Spain. So late Renaissance is the other way that you could classify it. But essentially we're dealing with Northern Europe and Spain. Ultimately, anything that's not Italian really is how it would, is the best way to think about it. So that's where we're headed. So chapter 23 in your book. All right? So make sure you read. Read the Bible. Read your Bible. Read your Bible. Read your Bible. Okay. Information. Key ideas that come out of the 16th century Northern Europe Renaissance. What we need to remember is, obviously, just like the Reformation or the Counter-Reformation being a large subject matter in Italy, that same concept will also translate up in the north, only they're coming from a different standpoint. But what happens due to the Reformation is there's a large amount of iconoclasm that takes place in the north. There's a lot of destructions of monasteries and images, paintings, sculptures, especially in England. So if you ever watched like the Showtime show, I think it's Showtime, The Tudors, which you guys aren't old enough really to watch that, they cover that portion of what happens historically. So there's this large amount of iconoclasm that takes place. So remember that remember that happening in the Byzantine period. It kind of happens again in the northern areas of Europe, which means that there was a large amount of destruction, not only of just the churches themselves or the monasteries, but the artwork in them. But oddly enough, you'd think that would kind of halt the amount of artistry traveling through Northern Europe, but in retrospect, it really didn't. There was a large amount of artistry coming out of the north. It just was not the same type of artistry that was more Catholic in origin. So they shift their style or their subject matter. So, and we've already seen that anyway from the early Renaissance in the north when we kind of spent some time looking at that, how there was a greater shift towards more secular images. We'll see that here continuing on, even though we're looking at two kind of religiously tied images up on the screen now. But with that, a lot of artists had to find new ways to work, especially sculptors, because they felt as though they couldn't produce these idolized or idol images anymore. These kind of pagan themes that was very popular down in Italy was not so popular up in the north, and they really felt that they were even more pagan than should have been allowed. So sculptors really kind of take a hit as far as what they're able to develop. But it definitely is this kind of interesting play of where the artistry is coming from. You'll definitely see the influences coming from Italy. All the advancements made by the Italian artists, we'll see them here. But it'll be kind of a slightly new take on things. And our most prominent artist of the north will be Albert Dürer. He's a massive printmaker. That's what he's perhaps most known for are his prints. And yes, Mariana, you're gonna love them. So he really kind of takes this new printing style that's really only been around for maybe like a century and really just kind of runs with it. And his images that he develops are absolutely gorgeous as far as these engravings and etchings are concerned in the printing world. So he really kind of brings about the Italian style and translates it into these prints in a very large scale up in the north. So here's how it happens historically. With the Reformation, you have this split, and the split kind of goes two ways. The countries that were Christian for the shortest period of time, historically, were the first ones to split and become Protestant. So that's Germany, Scandinavia, and the Netherlands. So remember that Christianity spreads from essentially, Israel, the Middle East, up into Europe. Rome embraces this new religion in 400. And then from there, if you were in part of the Roman Empire, you obviously then now were a Christian. That's just what happened. But those northern areas were the ones that were shortest reached. I mean, we know that a lot of that Christian faith doesn't quite get there until much later into the early medieval periods. That's when those kind of really start to embrace Christianity, which means they're the first ones to kind of leave the Catholic faith. They're kind of, they just aren't happy with how things are going. The ones that took longer to deal with this kind of issue were Spain, Italy, Portugal, and Poland. Now, those remain Catholic, but it took them a lot longer to deal with this kind of issue of Reformation or Counter-Reformation within their countries altogether. But with that, we obviously know that outside of not only the Protestants coming into play, you'll start to see a development in Calvinists, John Calvin, who kind of really spearheads it up in England and so forth. So, and he was kind of a big proponent of the iconoclasm in England as well. But nonetheless, the Catholic Church still wants to be kind of pay kind of patronage to the arts. So they still kept commissioning a lot of artists to do these artistic religious works because they felt as though if we keep doing this, our images can't be ignored and will eventually win people back over. But unfortunately, it doesn't fully work that way in the end. What we'll also notice is Alaric is a popular first name, so you want to focus on last names as well. Characteristics that are associated with paintings during this particular period of time is that we'll see this definite assimilation to the Italian Renaissance, but in a more northern European context. So one way to think about that is large use of symbolism within the paintings, as well as placing figures in contemporary clothing. If you remember when we looked at the early Renaissance in the north, all of those images, especially the religious ones like the Assumption of the Virgin, all of that, they were all wearing contemporary clothing of the times. But then when we shifted down to the early Renaissance in Italy, they kind of kept the religious images like the disciples, Christ, Mary. Those oftentimes were wearing more Roman attire, and then other people in the spaces would be in standard contemporary clothing. So in the north here, they'll take those idealized bodies from the Italians, but keep them in contemporary clothing. The Mannerist movement also, with this kind of elongated stylized figures, becomes very popular for our Northern European painters. So really our Northern European painters create a very good mix of the Italian art within their own traditions, and then kind of add in these minute details. Because remember, these artists of the North, are the ability to create the details that they had were astounding. So artists like Durer and Bruegel, definitely they studied the Italian styles. They even went and visited Italy, learned in Italy, and then came back to the north and painted in the north. Only there's a strong difference between Dur and Brugge, and we'll kind of talk about that when we hit them up as well. There's also, like kind of our Venetians, there's this fondness for nature that comes from our Northerners. So we'll see these very kind of mountainous landscapes. And they're pretty much involved in every painting. So the idea or the attention or the concept of a landscape is far more appealing to our Northerners than it was ever for our Italians. Our Venetians were kind of at that same period, and it could be that while the Venetians were painting, this was also very popular in the North, and we know that Venetians did a lot of exchanging. They were very much into commerce, so there probably would have been a lot of exchanging of ideas or seeing other paintings and going, wow, this is very grandiose. We really like this landscape thing. I think I'm going to go back and work it into mine, or, you know, vice versa. And we'll also see this transition as well of the Reformation, how that plays religiously in some of the images. So here we have Albert Aldorf's landscape, the Danube. But his one that really gets most of the attention is the Battle of Issus. Now, can we remember what is the Battle of Issus? We've seen it before.
Is it the one with, what's the one like, I know what it looks like, but I can't remember much about it. It was like a lot
Describe what it looks like.
I think it had, was it the Handle and Alexander the Great? Maybe that's what it was.
Like the Persian and the
Yeah,
Greek.
it was that one. That's what it was. What was it?
I don't know.
So what is it, Katie?
I think she's thinking of the one, the Persian, like Alexander the Great versus that other guy.
Yes, that is exactly it. The Battle of Issus, which initially was a Greek mosaic, and then it was then translated by Romans into, I believe, a fresco, and that's actually what I think we still have remnants of. But or it was a fresco by the Greeks and then turned into a mosaic by the Romans. I'd have to look that all up. But anyway, yes, the Battle of Issus, exactly that. That's that battle between Alexander the Great and the Persian king Darius in 333. However, the strong difference between this Battle of Issus and that Battle of Issus is if it was done by a Northern European, if it was painted by a Northern European, what can we expect to see in the image? Remember, this is a Roman event. How would a Northern European depict the Battle of Issus?
Maybe chaotic.
Yes, I mean, we can look at the image right now and definitely see that it is chaotic. But moreover, remember, one key difference between our Italian painters and our Northern European painters, outside of the excessive use of symbolism from our Northerners, is how do they depict people? This would be religious figures that weren't contemporary, but paint them in that way.
They paint them contemporary, like contemporary clothing.
Right. So if Altdorf is doing a painting of the Battle of Issus, how is he more than likely going to depict Alexander the Great's people? Because they were Roman.
As what the modern Romans look like, or the contemporary Romans of that time, or perhaps the contemporary northern armies would look like.
Exactly. So so essentially the Persians will look Persian, and Alexander the Great's people on his side will definitely be depicted in more medieval armor. And immediately we notice this very mountainous landscape in the backdrop, which really doesn't make sense if you're in Persia. So the environment also does not quite match the location. of the battle. So ultimately, the Battle of Issus is meant to be an illusion, or a metaphor for another battle that was fought against the Turks by William IV of Bavaria. And so we know symbolism is absolutely key here, and I wonder if we've got a closer up here. All right. So these are the Greeks here. These are supposed to be Alexander and his grouping here. And these, oh, hello. And these are the Turks over here, or these are rather the Persians over here. Now we know that this is supposed to be a symbolic representation of a Bavarian group, William IV, and his army against the Turks. But we also need to find some more symbolism, and one symbolism is associated with the sun in the background. Knowing the location of where each of the armies is placed on the lower half of the painting, what do you think that sun symbolizes?
Maybe like the peace that's about to come. Everything's all dark and it's kind of like the light.
Yeah, and notice what's on a Turkish flag.
Is the sun on a Turkish flag?
Are you guys seriously kidding me right now? You don't even know what the Turkish flag looks like? Oh my God.
Should we?
Yes.
I'm gonna learn about South Africa and world geography.
Yeah.
You only learn about South Africa and world geography.
Yep, our teacher was from South Africa and was obsessed with it. She
And
compared
she still
everything
teaches
to
like
South
that.
Africa. I had to do a PowerPoint thing. We had to do a PowerPoint thing once about comparing South American countries to South Africa.
Everything
crazy.
related back to South Africa.
And she still does that. Like in the hallway, you can see pictures of friggin' Africa.
I just died a little bit. You guys don't even know the Turkish flag. Oh my God.
I think she needs to sit
I mean, this
there.
is not like an obscure nation.
I know the Persian flag.
Okay, what's on the Persian flag?
It's green, white, and red, and then it has like Farsi on it and stuff, and then like leaf thingies and an eagle kind of thingy. And it's gold.
Oh my God.
Mexican flag.
Okay, so on the Turkish flag, it's red, and it has a crescent moon with a star.
I know the Philippine flag.
Wait.
Oh, it's like
Yeah.
little-
So looking at the sky,
Stars is red and yellow.
Oh, it's like the.
Okay.
That's a sun. No, not a sun.
I'm just gonna
Miss Lee's a little depressed
So
now.
maybe the sun is like showing that it's gonna overcome the Turks because they have a moon on their flag.
Right, and is there a moon in the painting?
No.
Because
Oh,
they
yes,
don't
on the
moon.
other side.
Oh, it's at the very
Oh,
top.
snap.
In the very corner.
Oh, snap is right. So he's definitely drawing a connection of the sun and moon,
That's cool. No,
right? And how this is rising up over the landscape in the background.
So they won or something?
God versus nature.
Okay.
I just died a little bit, so now I'm kind of lost on what I want to say. Anyway, there's the representation of the Nile. That's the river in the background there, because that was really the location of where the Battle of Issus kind of took place over near the Nile. But obviously, Aldorf isn't painting the Nile. He's really painting the Danube. So he's using the Danube as a reference for the Nile Delta in the background.
Is that where the Turk fight went down by the
Danube.
Probably, yes. No, not the Danube, because the Danube's in Europe, but the Nile is probably where there was some kind of battle with the Turks. We could probably look it up.
I think it's like that.
Danube?
Danube.
That's Danube.
No, Danube.
It's
D-A-N-U-B-E.
Martin Luther King.
Seriously? Really?
I'm just kidding.
Dan, B-U-E, Danube.
Oh. It's a weird pronunciation.
Oh, it's
That's
spelled that
spelling.
way.
Yeah. Danube or Danube.
Or we can look, maybe it's misspelled.
Who made up words?
It should be D-A-N-U-B-E.
Also, I heard it first time.
Yeah, I was like, Danube? Alright.
Honestly.
I didn't type these up.
Come on, person who typed these up.
Okay. Banners and flags and plaques all kind of help denote who is what within the battle itself. All right, on to something that's a little bit more interesting now that my heart just died a little bit. Oh my God. It's not even like it's an obscure country.
Their language is like.
So many things wrong in our education system. So many things wrong. All right, before I start venting. All right, Matthias Grunwald. And this is the Eisenheim altarpiece. What we see here is the central panel of the altarpiece while it's closed. Now remember, altarpieces up in the north are different than altarpieces in the south. They open and close. So this is the altarpiece in its state where it would be closed. So what do we see depicted here?
Christ on the cross.
Christ on the cross, exactly. And how does Christ on the cross look?
Very emaciated.
Very emaciated, right? Definitely looks like this body has been wrung through the ringer, right? I mean, it looks like it was tortured. Not so heroic looking in comparison to our Christ figures from Italy. He looks a little bit like our Christ figure from the Rütgen Pieta.
Was that one your favorite?
Yeah. The arms look like they literally have come out of their socket based on the positioning of the body. And he's no longer, I mean, he's clearly deceased, right? He's no longer standing. Look at even the feet. The ankle is so bent over. This body is just broken. But in true kind of symbolic style, I mean, this is kind of when we open this up and we hear about where this is taking place, we'll kind of better understand why Grunwald paints his Christ figure like this, as well as the image on the inside. So if we kind of had to guess, well, we'll go to the inside panel here. Okay, the inside panel here. This is the center. Down below, clearly we have the entombment of Christ, and two side panels here flanking, and we'll look at those and talk about them here in a minute. But this painting, or this altarpiece, was placed in a monastery hospital where people were treated for St. Anthony's fire. Are you guys familiar with what St. Anthony's fire is?
A fire in St. Anthony.
Yes, Katie, that is exactly what it is. How did you know? St. Anthony's fire is the non-scientific term for ergotism. And ergotism is essentially a disease that's caused by having eaten fungus that grows on rye flour.
Why would you eat a flower?
No, not as in
Oh,
FLO,
flower.
like rye bread.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh God. So you have to imagine like bread, right? Bread doesn't stay forever. And if we don't live in a world with refrigerators and we don't put preservatives in our food, bread goes rotten very fast. Mold starts to grow on it. And so if you ate that mold, that fungus, you could get very sick. And in this case, you can actually die from that, especially if it's on rye bread or rye flour. So ergotism is this kind of disease that you get from eating that fungus, that mold that grows on there. So so Saint Anthony appears in the first and third panel in the presence of the fire. The first view here, clearly we have the crucifixion. It's got a very dark background. We have dead, decomposing flesh. Arms appear torn from the sockets. We talked all about how just absolutely broken the body is. You also see kind of the agony of the body in this kind of swooning Mary. All these things are supposed to represent or connect to those who suffer from ergotism. So another scene.
Why exactly is it called St. Anthony's Fire?
Why is it called St. Anthony's Fire? We probably would have to look up why ergotism is referred to as St. Anthony's Fire. We can do that here after we're done talking about this one. We'll go and jump and we'll Wikipedia it. It probably has to do with some kind of burning sensation that you probably get, would be my guess on that one. Ergotism ergotism ultimately causes gangrene. You can get gangrene and convulsion. Really, the gangrene oftentimes sets in because you have to cut lesions out of your body, and then they become diseased and infected, and so then they eventually have to start chopping off limbs. It's not pretty. So and so maybe the convulsions would be associated with perhaps if you're going into a transient state, it's like speaking in tongues. Okay, they weren't necessarily speaking, but that's what the convulsions. Convulsions were probably more even epileptic too, perhaps. So people could believe that initially that God was speaking to them. Perhaps they were going into this transient state. So our first view of the altarpiece definitely shows the torturous life here. But the inside offers a far more different view. When it's opened up, you have more Marian-like symbols. We have the enclosed garden, gates, rose bushes, a rosary. We have images of Christ rising from the dead on the right. His rags that he's depicted in the first part are now changed into kind of these very beauteous, gorgeous robes that kind of flow around him. He even shows the wounds of his body. So symbolically, what is Grunwald kind of trying to address here? Given its location, its function, in a monastery that treats people who suffer from a horrible disease, body parts become amputated. Often, many times, they would still even die from those amputations themselves. What is Grunwald doing here by creating a grotesque image on the exterior, but a very beauteous and you could even say relaxing image on the interior?
Maybe to like show that for like right now it's like really hard, but then afterwards, like once it's gone, once you die, you'll be okay.
Right, peace will eventually come in many ways. It's kind of a reminding of, while you may be suffering, Christ also suffered. So eventually you shall receive the peace that you so desperately seek. And the thought here is that as these patients agonize away, they could look upon this and gain some level of mental peace or mental security. Here's, you can see a close-up of the body of the Christ figure. Definitely looks like he's got all these lesions from where he was whipped. How broken the hand appears. Here, and there's a line of division on the bottom panel. It's placed there so that Grunwald could make it look as though Christ's body was being amputated. Again, trying to relate the sufferings of those in this hospital to that of Christ. Making that relationship was vitally key. An amputation here on the arm. So it's placed this way with intent. I mean, he could have painted the crucifixion right down the dead center, but instead he offsets it. There is intent and meaning behind that. A grieving Mary and Mary Magdalene. This is probably like my favorite altarpiece. I just really like the juxtaposition of the front and the interior.
I like the meaning.
Hmm?
I like the meaning.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism behind this meaning of the altarpiece.
Honestly, kind of fades into this, like something.
Yeah, he kind of fades into the sun, almost like this mandorla, only not blue, right? Again, mandolas are everywhere. Just kind of like lions. They just never go away.
It has like a little outer blue glow.
Yep, an outer blue glow. Mm-hmm.
Maybe because it's so hot. Because it's the sun.
This here is the other portion of the altarpiece, the side that you don't see. This is the torture of St. Anthony.
Torture or temptation?
Or temptation, rather, sorry. The temptation of, well, he looks like he's being tortured, though, if you want. So, immediately, what comes to mind when you look at these demons?
They look like animals.
They look like the things from the Garden of Earthly Delights.
Yeah. Right? Our painting by, who was the artist? I want to say Orff, but for some reason I think that that's wrong.
Wait, for what?
Garden of Earthly Delights. Bosch, that's right. Bosch. Exactly. And here you even see, right,